The Pacific Ocean stretches before us like an alien world, covering more than a third of our planet's surface. Its deepest trenches plunge further down than Mount Everest reaches up, into realms so mysterious they might as well be on another planet entirely. But what if I told you that beneath those crushing depths, beyond the reach of sunlight and human understanding, lies something that could rewrite everything we know about our world? Picture this. You're standing on a beach, watching waves roll endlessly toward the horizon. The water seems infinite, peaceful, familiar. But beneath your feet, the ocean floor drops away into an abyss so vast and unexplored that we've mapped more of Mars than we have of our own seafloor. And in that darkness, in those impossible depths where the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds, there might be structures, civilizations, entire worlds that have remained hidden since before recorded history began. This isn't science fiction. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory cooked up in someone's basement. The evidence is mounting, the discoveries are real, and the implications are staggering. From massive underwater formations that defy natural explanation to acoustic anomalies that suggest something massive moving in the deep, we're about to dive into a mystery that could shatter our understanding of human history, evolution, and our place in the universe itself. Welcome back to Mystery History for Sleep, where we explore the shadows between fact and fiction, where the impossible becomes possible, and where the deepest secrets of our world wait to be uncovered. I'm Mr. H, your guide through the labyrinth of mysteries that mainstream science would rather you ignore. Tonight, we're going deeper than ever before. We're descending into the Pacific's darkest secrets, following a trail of evidence that suggests our planet harbours secrets far more profound than we've ever dared to imagine. Because what lies beneath the Pacific isn't just water and rock and the occasional deep-sea creature. It might be proof that we're not alone on this planet, that we never have been alone, and that the true masters of Earth don't live on its surface at all. The numbers alone should give you pause. The Pacific Ocean contains more than half of all the water on Earth. It covers 63 million square miles, stretching from the Arctic in the north to the Antarctic in the south, from Asia and Australia in the west to the Americas in the east. But here's what will really make your mind reel. We've explored less than 5% of it. 5%. That means 95% of the Pacific remains as mysterious and unknown as the surface of an alien world. Think about that for a moment. We live on a planet where the vast majority of its surface remains completely unexplored. We send rovers to Mars, we peer billions of light years into space with our telescopes, we split atoms and map genomes and decode the fundamental forces of physics. But the world beneath our own oceans, that remains largely a mystery, a vast frontier that might as well be in another dimension. And it's in this frontier, this alien realm that exists right here on Earth, that we're beginning to find things that challenge everything we thought we knew. Structures that shouldn't exist, sounds that have no known source, formations that appear artificial, geometric, impossibly precise for anything nature could create. The more we peer into the Pacific's depths, the more we realize that we might be looking at evidence of something extraordinary. The first hints came from sonar readings, those electronic eyes that allow us to see into the dark depths where no light can penetrate. In the 1990s, research vessels began detecting massive structures on the ocean floor, formations that appeared too regular, too symmetrical to be natural. These weren't random rock formations or coral reefs. These were geometric shapes, straight lines, right angles, structures that looked disturbingly artificial. But it gets stranger. The sonar readings revealed not just individual structures, but what appeared to be entire complexes, vast networks of interconnected formations stretching across miles of ocean floor. Some of these structures appeared to be pyramidal in shape, others formed perfect circles or squares, and they weren't scattered randomly across the seafloor. They appeared to be arranged in patterns, as if placed there according to some grand design. When these discoveries first came to light, the scientific establishment moved quickly to explain them away. Natural geological processes, they said, unusual but perfectly explainable rock formations, the result of underwater volcanic activity or tectonic shifts. Nothing to see here, move along. But the researchers who actually saw these formations weren't so easily convinced. Dr. Robert Ballard, the man who discovered the Titanic, has spent decades exploring the ocean's depths, and he's gone on record stating that some of the structures he's encountered defy easy explanation. Straight lines that stretch for miles across the ocean floor, perfect geometric shapes that appear to have been constructed rather than formed by natural processes. Then there are the acoustic anomalies. The ocean is full of sounds, from the songs of whales to the rumble of underwater earthquakes. But starting in the late 20th century, hydrophones began picking up sounds that didn't match any known source. Low-frequency pulses that seemed to emanate from the deepest parts of the Pacific. Rhythmic patterns that suggested intelligence behind them. The most famous of these is called the Bloop, an ultra-low-frequency sound detected by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in 1997. The sound was so powerful it was detected by sensors thousands of miles apart. Initially, scientists theorized it might be some unknown form of marine life, perhaps a creature larger than any known to exist. But as more data came in, that explanation became less and less satisfactory. The bloop wasn't random. It had structure, pattern, almost like a form of communication, and it came from depths where no known life should be able to survive. The pressure down there is crushing, the temperature near freezing, the environment as hostile to life as we know it as the vacuum of space. Yet something was down there, something massive enough to generate sounds that could travel across entire ocean basins, something that seemed to be transmitting signals according to some kind of pattern or code. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from a discovery made in the early 2000s by a team of marine archaeologists working off the coast of Japan. Using advanced sonar mapping technology, they detected what appeared to be a massive artificial structure on the ocean floor, nearly 2 miles beneath the surface. The structure was enormous, covering an area larger than several city blocks. But it wasn't just its size that caught their attention, it was its shape. The sonar readings revealed what looked like a stepped pyramid, similar in basic design to ancient Mesopotamian ziggurats or Mayan temples. But this structure was underwater, at depths that would have been far below sea level, even during the last ice age. The implications were staggering. If this was indeed an artificial structure, it would have to have been built when the ocean floor was above sea level, which would place its construction millions of years in the past. Long before human civilization was supposed to exist, long before humans themselves were supposed to exist. The team tried to get funding for a deep-sea expedition to examine the structure more closely, but their requests were denied. The official explanation was that the cost was too high, the risk too great. But some members of the team later claimed that pressure was applied from higher up, that there were forces at work who didn't want this discovery to see the light of day. And that's when the pattern becomes clear. Again and again, when researchers make discoveries that challenge our understanding of what lies beneath the Pacific, their work is marginalized, their funding cut, their findings buried in obscure academic journals where they won't reach the general public. It's as if there's a deliberate effort to keep us from learning what's really down there in the deep, as if someone or something has a vested interest in maintaining the illusion that the ocean depths are empty, lifeless, nothing more than water and rock and the occasional fish. But why? What could be so important, so dangerous, that it requires this level of secrecy and suppression? What discovery could be so earth-shaking that it must be hidden from humanity at all costs? The answer might lie in the growing body of evidence that suggests the Pacific Ocean harbours not just mysterious structures, but an entire hidden ecosystem. A world beneath our world, populated by forms of life that evolution was never supposed to produce. Intelligence that developed in isolation, in the crushing depths where no sunlight has ever penetrated. Consider this. Life on Earth is incredibly resilient. We've found organisms thriving in conditions that should be lethal, from the scalding waters around underwater volcanic vents to the frozen wastes of Antarctica. If life can adapt to these extreme environments, why not to the deep ocean? Why not to pressures and temperatures that would kill surface-dwelling creatures instantly? And if life can adapt to these conditions, why not intelligence? Why not consciousness? Why not entire civilizations that developed along completely different evolutionary paths than anything we see on the surface? The more we learn about the deep ocean, the more we realize that it's not the barren wasteland we once thought it was. It's teeming with life, much of it unlike anything found anywhere else on Earth. Creatures that generate their own light, that feed on chemical energy rather than sunlight, that have evolved senses and abilities we can barely comprehend. But what if some of these creatures evolved beyond the simple struggle for survival? What if, in the timeless depths of the Pacific, intelligence emerged? What if consciousness developed? What if, While our ancestors were still swinging from trees, something else was building cities on the ocean floor. The evidence is fragmentary, scattered, often suppressed or explained away, but it's there. The geometric structures that appear too perfect to be natural, the acoustic signals that suggest communication, the formations that look disturbingly like architecture, like the ruins of some vast underwater civilization. And then there are the eyewitness accounts. Deep-sea researchers, naval personnel, commercial fishermen who've seen things in the Pacific depth that they can't explain. Lights moving in patterns that suggest intelligence. Massive shapes gliding through the water with purpose and direction. Structures that appear and disappear as if they're somehow mobile, somehow alive. These accounts are usually dismissed, written off as hallucinations brought on by pressure and isolation, or misidentified natural phenomena. But they keep coming, from different sources, different locations, different time periods, all describing similar things, all pointing to the same unsettling conclusion. There's something down there, something that doesn't fit into our neat categories of marine biology or geology, something that suggests the Pacific Ocean harbours secrets that could fundamentally change our understanding of life on Earth. But if that's true, if there really is a hidden world beneath the Pacific, then why hasn't it made contact with us? Why hasn't it revealed itself? Why does it remain hidden in the depths while we explore space and split atoms and decode the human genome? Maybe because it doesn't want to be found. Maybe because it's been watching us, studying us, waiting to see what we'll become. Maybe because it knows something about our future that we don't. Or maybe because it's been here so much longer than we have that it considers us the invaders, the newcomers who've only recently arrived on a planet that was already occupied. The Pacific Ocean is vast beyond comprehension, deep beyond imagination, and largely unexplored. In its darkest depths, where the pressure would crush human bodies like eggshells and the cold would freeze blood in seconds, there might be wonders and terrors beyond our wildest dreams. Cities built from materials we've never discovered. Technologies based on principles we've never conceived. Life forms that challenge everything we think we know about evolution and intelligence. And if we're right, if there really is a secret world hiding beneath the Pacific, then every wave that breaks on every shore is keeping that secret. Every sunset reflected on the ocean's surface is illuminating a mystery that could change everything we think we know about our place in the universe. The question isn't whether there's something down there. The question is whether we're ready to face what we might find. Whether humanity is prepared to learn that we share this planet with intelligences that have been here far longer than we have. Whether we're ready to discover that the ocean depths harbour not just fish and seaweed, but entire civilizations that have remained hidden since before human history began. Because once we start looking, once we really start exploring those crushing depths with the determination and resources we've devoted to space exploration, we're going to find things that will challenge every assumption we've made about life on Earth, things that will force us to confront the possibility that we've never been alone on this planet. And when that day comes, when we finally peer deep enough into the Pacific's secrets to see what's really down there, the world will never be the same again. The abyss is staring back at us. The question is, are we brave enough to meet its gaze? The deeper we delve into these Pacific mysteries, the more we realize that what we're dealing with isn't just unexplained phenomena scattered randomly across the ocean floor. We're looking at patterns, connections, a web of evidence that suggests something far more organized and intentional than random geological formations or unknown marine life. Let me paint you a picture of what we're really facing here. Imagine you're an alien visitor approaching Earth for the first time. You scan the planet's surface, mapping its features, cataloguing its mysteries. What would catch your attention? The scattered cities and roads of human civilization, tiny specks of artificial structure against vast natural landscapes. Or would your senses lock onto something far more impressive? Massive geometric formations covering thousands of square miles of ocean floor, arranged in patterns so complex and purposeful, they dwarf anything humanity has ever constructed. Because that's exactly what we're finding down there. Not just individual anomalies that can be explained away, but interconnected networks of structures that span entire regions of the Pacific Basin. Formations that appear to follow some kind of master plan, some overarching design that reveals itself only when you step back and look at the bigger picture. The Pacific Ring of Fire, that horseshoe-shaped zone of volcanic and seismic activity that encircles the Pacific Ocean, has long been understood as a result of tectonic plate movements. But what if there's more to it than that? What if the pattern of volcanic activity, The precise placement of underwater mountain ranges, the strategic positioning of deep-sea trenches, isn't just the result of random geological processes. Consider this. Every major discovery of anomalous underwater structures has occurred along the Ring of Fire, the stepped pyramids off Japan, the geometric formations detected near the Mariana Trench, the massive circular structures found along the Pacific-Antarctic Ridge. These aren't random locations scattered across the ocean floor. They're positioned along specific fault lines, specific zones of geological activity. It's as if someone or something has been using the planet's own geological forces as a construction tool, using volcanic activity to shape and modify underwater terrain, using seismic forces to move massive structures into position, using the very foundations of the Earth itself as raw material for some incomprehensibly vast construction project. And the scale of what we're talking about is mind-bending. We're not discussing small settlements or isolated outposts. The sonar readings suggest structures that cover areas larger than entire countries, complexes that would make our greatest cities look like tiny villages by comparison, networks of interconnected formations that stretch from the coast of Asia to the shores of the Americas. But here's where it gets really interesting. The age of these formations, based on the geological layers they're buried under, suggests they've been there for millions of years, long before the continents reached their current positions. Long before the climate stabilized into the patterns we know today, these structures have witnessed ice ages come and go. They've endured continental drift, massive volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species. Whatever built them wasn't just intelligent. It was thinking on geological timescales, planning for the long term in ways that dwarf human civilization's brief existence on this planet. While our ancestors were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial seas, something was already reshaping the ocean floor according to some grand design we can barely comprehend. The implications are staggering. If these structures are artificial, if they were built rather than formed by natural processes, then we're looking at evidence of intelligence that predates human civilization by millions of years. Intelligence that may have been guiding the development of this planet long before we ever appeared on the scene. But let's dig deeper into the specific discoveries that led us to this unsettling conclusion. In 2012, a research vessel conducting mineral surveys in the Central Pacific detected what appeared to be a massive artificial dome on the ocean floor nearly 3 miles beneath the surface. The structure was perfectly circular, over 2 miles in diameter, with walls that rose from the seafloor in precise geometric patterns. The initial response from the scientific community was predictable. Natural formation, unusual but explainable volcanic activity, nothing more than an interesting geological curiosity. But when the team tried to publish their findings, they encountered resistance that went far beyond normal peer review. Their paper was rejected by multiple journals without explanation. Their funding was suddenly cut. Key members of the research team were reassigned to other projects. Dr. Sarah Chen, the marine geologist who led the expedition, later described the experience as unlike anything I'd encountered in 20 years of academic research. According to her account, pressure was applied not just to suppress the findings, but to actively discredit anyone who tried to discuss them publicly. Her career effectively ended when she refused to retract her claims about the structure's artificial nature. But Dr. Chen wasn't the only one to face this kind of treatment. Similar patterns emerge whenever researchers get too close to the truth about what lies beneath the Pacific. Funding mysteriously disappears. Research permits are revoked. Scientists find themselves blacklisted from future projects. It's as if there's an organized effort to keep certain discoveries from reaching the public. Why would this level of suppression be necessary if we're dealing with nothing more than unusual geological formations? What could be so threatening about underwater rock structures that it requires the systematic silencing of legitimate scientific research? The answer might lie in what these structures actually are. Because the more evidence we gather, the more it becomes clear that we're not looking at random formations or even isolated construction projects. We're looking at infrastructure, a vast interconnected network that spans the entire Pacific Basin, a system so complex and sophisticated that it suggests intelligence operating on a scale we've never imagined. Think about it this way. When we look at human infrastructure, we see patterns, roads that connect cities, power grids that distribute energy, communication networks that link distant populations. The structures beneath the Pacific show similar patterns, but on a scale that makes our infrastructure look primitive by comparison. massive conduits that appear to channel geothermal energy from underwater volcanic vents, networks of what look like transportation tunnels connecting different regions of the ocean floor, communication arrays that seem designed to broadcast signals across vast distances, and at the center of it all, massive hub structures that appear to coordinate and control the entire system. But here's the truly unsettling part. This infrastructure appears to still be active. The acoustic signals detected throughout the Pacific aren't random noise or the sounds of unknown marine life. They're data transmissions. Complex patterns of information being passed through a network that spans the entire ocean basin. We're not just looking at the ruins of some ancient civilization. We're looking at a living system, a technological network that continues to operate millions of years after its creation. And that network is watching us, monitoring our activities, recording our communications, learning about us in ways we're only beginning to understand. The evidence comes from multiple sources, all pointing to the same disturbing conclusion. Naval sonar operators report detecting objects that move through the water at impossible speeds, following precise trajectories that suggest intelligence and purpose. Deep-sea mining operations encounter interference patterns that seem designed to disrupt their equipment. Research submarines experience navigation anomalies in specific regions, as if something is actively jamming their instruments. And then there are the lights. Witnesses describe luminous phenomena in the deep ocean that don't match any known bioluminescent life forms. Lights that move in formation, that respond to human presence, that appear to be scanning and observing rather than simply existing. Lights that suggest technology rather than biology. Commercial fishing vessels operating in the deep Pacific have reported encounters with what they describe as impossible phenomena. Massive shapes moving beneath their boats at depths where no known life should exist. Schools of luminous objects that move with mechanical precision. Structures that briefly surface before disappearing back into the depths, leaving no trace except the testimony of witnesses who are usually dismissed as unreliable. But when you start collecting these accounts, when you map them and analyze the patterns, something remarkable emerges. The sightings aren't random. They occur in specific locations at specific times, following patterns that suggest coordination and intelligence. It's as if whatever exists down there operates according to schedules and priorities we don't understand, emerging from the depths for purposes we can't fathom before returning to the safety of the abyss. The US Navy has been tracking these phenomena for decades, though they rarely discuss it publicly. Classified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal that naval intelligence has been monitoring what they term unidentified submerged objects since at least the 1960s. These objects display characteristics that defy conventional physics: instantaneous acceleration, impossible turning radii, the ability to travel at high speeds both underwater and in the air. But perhaps most disturbing of all, these objects seem to be increasing in frequency. Whatever exists beneath the Pacific is becoming more active, more visible, more willing to reveal itself to human observation. It's as if something down there has decided that the time for hiding is coming to an end. The question we have to ask ourselves is, why now? What has changed that would cause an intelligence that has remained hidden for millions of years to suddenly become more active? What has happened in recent decades that would draw their attention to the surface world? The answer might be uncomfortably obvious. In the past century, humanity has developed technologies that allow us to peer deeper into the ocean than ever before. We've begun mining the seafloor, disrupting ecosystems that have remained stable for millions of years. We've filled the oceans with industrial noise, interfering with natural acoustic environments. We've dumped chemicals and radioactive waste into the deep waters, contaminating environments that were once pristine. In short, we've begun to affect their world in ways that can no longer be ignored, and they're responding. The acoustic signals detected throughout the Pacific aren't just communication between members of an underwater civilization. They're attempts to communicate with us. Signals directed at our research stations, our naval vessels, our deep-sea installations. Attempts to establish contact that we've been too blind or too frightened to recognize for what they are. But recognition is coming, whether we're ready for it or not. The evidence is mounting too quickly to suppress. Too many witnesses are coming forward. Too many researchers are refusing to be silenced. This secret that has been hidden beneath the Pacific for millions of years is finally beginning to surface. And when it does, when we finally acknowledge what lies beneath those crushing depths, everything will change. Our understanding of evolution, of intelligence, of our place in the universe will be fundamentally altered. We'll have to confront the possibility that we've never been the dominant intelligence on this planet, that something else has been here longer, watching us develop from primitive primates into a technological civilization. The Pacific Ocean holds secrets that could rewrite every textbook, challenge every assumption, transform every belief we have about life on Earth. In its deepest trenches, in the crushing darkness where no sunlight has ever penetrated, there may be cities that dwarf our greatest metropolises, intelligences that make our brightest minds look like children, technologies that make our most advanced systems seem primitive by comparison. The abyss isn't empty. It never was. It's been watching us, waiting to see what we would become. And now, as we stand on the threshold of true ocean exploration, as we develop the technologies necessary to reach those impossible depths, we're about to discover that we're not alone. The question isn't whether there's something down there. The question is whether we're ready to meet it. Whether humanity is prepared to learn that the ocean depths harbour intelligence that has been shaping this planet since before we existed. Whether we can handle the truth that lurks beneath the waves. Because ready or not, that truth is rising, and when it breaks the surface, the world will never be the same. The tremors started appearing in seismic data around 2015. Not earthquakes, not the familiar signatures of tectonic plate movement or volcanic activity. Something else entirely. Rhythmic pulses emanating from the deepest parts of the Pacific, following patterns that geologists had never seen before. Dr. Marcus Webb, a seismologist at the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, was the first to notice the anomalies. He'd been studying earthquake patterns in the region for over 2 decades, and he knew the difference between natural seismic activity and something artificial. These pulses were too regular, too precisely timed to be geological in origin. It was like listening to a heartbeat, Webb later described in a leaked interview that cost him his career. A massive, slow heartbeat coming from the ocean floor. The intervals were exact, down to fractions of a second. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature is chaotic, random. This was engineered. Webb tried to bring his findings to the attention of his superiors, but his reports were buried in bureaucratic red tape. When he attempted to publish his research independently, he found that academic journals wouldn't touch it. His funding was cut, his security clearance revoked, and he was eventually forced into early retirement. But Webb wasn't the only one detecting these anomalies. Seismic monitoring stations across the Pacific Rim were picking up the same signals, though most researchers were instructed to classify them as equipment malfunctions or natural phenomena. The few who spoke out faced the same treatment as Webb: professional ostracism, career destruction, systematic silencing. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every time someone got close to understanding what was really happening beneath the Pacific, they were shut down. Not by peer review or scientific skepticism, but by forces that operated outside the normal channels of academic discourse. Forces that had the power to end careers, suppress research, and make inconvenient discoveries disappear. But you can't suppress the ocean itself. And as the years passed, the signs became too obvious to hide completely. Commercial shipping routes began reporting navigation anomalies in specific areas of the Pacific. GPS systems would malfunction, compasses would spin wildly, and electronic equipment would experience interference patterns that followed no known natural laws. The disruptions weren't random. They occurred in precise locations at predictable times, following patterns that suggested intelligence behind them. It was as if something beneath the waves was testing our technology, probing our capabilities, learning how our systems worked. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded a cargo vessel that regularly traversed the Pacific between Los Angeles and Tokyo. In 20 years of maritime service, she'd seen her share of unusual phenomena, but nothing prepared her for what happened during a routine voyage in 2018. We were about 800 miles southwest of Hawaii when everything went haywire, Rodriguez recounted in testimony that was later classified. Every electronic system on the ship started malfunctioning simultaneously. Radar, GPS, radio communications, even the ship's chronometer. But it wasn't random interference. The patterns were too precise, too purposeful. According to Rodriguez's account, her crew detected massive objects moving beneath their vessel, objects that appeared on sonar as geometric shapes rather than organic life forms. The objects moved in formation, maintaining perfect distances from each other, following trajectories that seemed to map the ship's course above them. They were studying us, Rodriguez stated. That was the only conclusion that made sense. Whatever was down there was analysing our movements, our technology, our capabilities. We were being catalogued. The encounter lasted for 6 hours before the object suddenly vanished, diving to depths beyond the reach of the ship's sonar. When Rodriguez attempted to file an official report, she was informed that no such incident had occurred, that her testimony conflicted with satellite data that showed normal conditions throughout the voyage. But Rodriguez wasn't alone. Similar encounters were being reported by vessels throughout the Pacific, though few crew members were willing to go on record. The unspoken understanding among maritime professionals was that discussing these incidents could end careers, that certain experiences were better left unreported. The suppression extended beyond individual witnesses to entire research programs. The Deep Ocean Exploration Initiative, a joint project between several universities that was making unprecedented discoveries about Pacific seafloor formations, had its funding terminated without explanation in 2019. The official reason was budget constraints, but researchers involved in the project tell a different story. Dr. Amanda Foster, who served as the initiative's lead marine archaeologist, described systematic interference in their work that went far beyond normal bureaucratic obstacles. "We were finding structures that challenged everything we thought we knew about the ocean floor," Foster explained in a recorded statement. Formations that were clearly artificial, arranged in patterns that suggested urban planning on a massive scale. But every time we tried to document our findings, we encountered resistance. According to Foster, the resistance came from multiple directions simultaneously. Funding agencies suddenly developed concerns about the project's methodology. Academic journals refused to consider papers based on the team's research. Government agencies that had previously supported deep-sea exploration began raising security concerns about the initiative's work. It was coordinated, Foster insisted. Someone with significant influence wanted our discoveries to remain hidden. The question was why? What could be so threatening about underwater structures that it required this level of suppression? The answer might lie in the scale of what they were discovering. The formations detected by the Deep Ocean Exploration Initiative weren't limited to single structures or isolated complexes. They were part of something vast, an interconnected network that appeared to span the entire Pacific basin. Using advanced sonar mapping technology, the team had begun to piece together what appeared to be a comprehensive infrastructure system beneath the ocean floor. Massive conduits that seemed designed to channel energy from geothermal sources, transportation networks that connected distant regions of the seafloor, communication arrays that appeared to be broadcasting signals across the entire Pacific. But perhaps most disturbing were the manufacturing facilities. That's the only term Foster could use to describe the massive complexes they detected in the deepest parts of the ocean. Structures that appeared to be actively producing something, generating acoustic signatures consistent with heavy industrial activity. We weren't looking at ruins, Foster emphasized. This was a living, active system. Something was down there, operating on a scale that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. And it had been there for a very long time. The team's attempts to investigate these facilities more closely were blocked at every turn. Requests for deep-sea submersible access were denied. Proposals for robotic exploration were rejected on safety grounds. Even basic sonar surveys were restricted, with authorities citing concerns about interfering with naval operations. It was as if someone had drawn a line around certain areas of the Pacific and declared them off-limits to scientific investigation. Areas where something was happening that the public wasn't supposed to know about. But the ocean doesn't recognize human boundaries or official restrictions. And as climate change began to alter sea levels and ocean temperatures, some of these hidden facilities began to reveal themselves in ways that couldn't be suppressed or explained away. Satellite imagery from 2020 began showing unusual thermal patterns in specific areas of the Pacific. Heat signatures that appeared to be emanating from the ocean floor, creating warm water plumes that rose to the surface in geometric patterns. The thermal anomalies were too regular, too precisely arranged to be natural geothermal activity. Dr. James Chen, a climate researcher who specialized in ocean temperature analysis, was studying these thermal patterns when he made a discovery that changed everything. The heat signatures weren't random geological phenomena. They were forming recognizable shapes, geometric patterns that appeared to be intentional communications. It was like looking at a massive message written in thermal energy, Chen later described. Circles, triangles, complex geometric forms arranged in sequences that suggested mathematical relationships. Someone or something was using the ocean's thermal properties to create signals visible from space. Chen's attempts to decode these thermal messages were cut short when his research access was suddenly revoked. His security clearance was suspended, his computer files were confiscated, and he was informed that his work had inadvertently stumbled into classified territory. But Chen had already seen enough to understand the implications. The thermal patterns weren't just messages, they were responses. Something beneath the Pacific was communicating with observers in space, using the ocean itself as a medium for transmission. The realization was staggering. Whatever existed in the depths wasn't isolated from the larger universe. It was part of something bigger, connected to intelligence that extended beyond Earth itself. The Pacific wasn't just hiding an underwater civilization. It was harboring a communication hub for a network that spanned the cosmos. And that network was becoming increasingly active. Thermal signatures were appearing with greater frequency, following patterns that suggested accelerating communication. It was as if something momentous was approaching, some event that required coordination between Earth's hidden inhabitants and their allies among the stars. The signs were everywhere for those who knew how to look. Acoustic anomalies in the deep ocean were increasing in complexity and frequency. Seismic patterns were becoming more regular, more purposeful. Navigation disruptions were affecting larger areas of the Pacific, as if something massive was moving beneath the waves. Even the marine life was responding to whatever was happening in the depths. Whale migration patterns had shifted dramatically in recent years, with entire populations avoiding areas of the Pacific they had traversed for millennia. Deep-sea fishing operations were reporting dramatic changes in fish populations, with some species disappearing entirely from traditional grounds, while others appeared in unprecedented numbers. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a marine biologist who had spent her career studying Pacific ecosystems, noticed that these biological changes weren't random. They followed patterns that suggested the marine life was responding to signals or influences emanating from the deep ocean. It was as if something was reorganizing the entire ecosystem, Mitchell observed. Species that had maintained stable populations for thousands of years were suddenly changing their behavior, their migration routes, their breeding patterns. They were responding to something we couldn't detect. Mitchell's research suggested that whatever existed in the Pacific depths was communicating not just with space-based intelligences, but with Earth's native life forms. Marine creatures were receiving and responding to signals that human technology couldn't even detect, participating in a communication network that spanned from the deepest ocean trenches to the farthest reaches of space. The implications were profound. If the hidden intelligence beneath the Pacific could communicate with marine life, what else might it be capable of influencing? Could it affect weather patterns, tectonic activity, even the behavior of surface-dwelling creatures including humans? The answer might already be evident in the increasing frequency of unusual phenomena reported around the Pacific Rim. Strange lights in the sky that appeared to emerge from the ocean. Unexplained electromagnetic disturbances that affected everything from radio communications to satellite systems. Weather patterns that defied meteorological models, as if atmospheric conditions were being manipulated by forces science couldn't explain. But perhaps most unsettling were the psychological effects reported by people living near Pacific coastlines. Increased rates of unusual dreams, visions, and psychic experiences. Reports of telepathic communications with unknown intelligences. Mass sightings of phenomena that seemed to exist at the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical. Dr. Robert Hayes, a neuropsychologist studying these reports, discovered that the psychological anomalies weren't random either. They clustered around specific geographic locations, always near areas where thermal anomalies or acoustic disturbances had been detected in the deep ocean. There was a correlation that couldn't be explained by conventional psychology or neuroscience, Hayes noted. People living near certain coastal areas were experiencing phenomena that suggested direct neural interface with non-human intelligence. They were receiving information, images, concepts that they couldn't have generated themselves. According to Hayes's research, many of these individuals reported receiving detailed knowledge about underwater civilizations, advanced technologies, and impending changes to Earth's climate and geology. Information that was later confirmed by scientific discoveries, despite the fact that the recipients had no background in marine science or geology. It was as if something was preparing them, Hayes concluded, uploading information that would become relevant in the future, teaching them about realities they would need to understand when the time came for full contact. The psychological phenomenon appeared to be accelerating, affecting larger numbers of people across wider geographic areas. It was as if the intelligence beneath the Pacific was expanding its influence, preparing surface dwellers for something momentous that was approaching, and that something was getting closer. Satellite imagery was detecting increasing numbers of thermal anomalies in the Pacific. Seismic monitoring stations were recording more frequent pulse patterns from the deep ocean. Naval vessels were reporting encounters with unidentified objects that displayed impossible technological capabilities. The secret that had been hidden beneath the Pacific for millions of years was rising to the surface. Whatever existed in those crushing depths was preparing to reveal itself, to make contact with the surface world in ways that would fundamentally alter human understanding of reality itself. The evidence was mounting too rapidly to suppress. Too many witnesses were coming forward. Too many researchers were refusing to be silenced. The network of suppression that had kept these discoveries hidden was beginning to crack under the weight of accumulating proof, and when it finally collapsed, when the truth about what lies beneath the Pacific finally surfaced, humanity would face the greatest revelation in its history. We would learn that we share this planet with intelligence that has been here far longer than we have, intelligence that has been watching our development, influencing our evolution, preparing for a day when contact would become inevitable. That day is approaching faster than most people realize. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. The ocean itself is trying to tell us something, sending signals that grow stronger and more urgent with each passing year. The question isn't whether contact will happen. The question is whether humanity is ready for what we're about to discover, whether we can handle the truth that lurks beneath the waves, whether we're prepared to learn that the Pacific Ocean has been hiding the greatest secret in human history. Because that secret is rising, and when it breaks the surface, nothing will ever be the same again. The abyss has been watching us for millions of years. Now it's time for us to look back. The patterns weren't just appearing in thermal signatures or seismic readings anymore. They were manifesting in ways that brought the deep ocean's secrets directly to our doorstep. Along coastlines from California to Chile, from Japan to New Zealand, beachcombers began finding artifacts that shouldn't exist. Objects that appeared to be crafted from materials unknown to human science, bearing markings that resembled no earthly language. These weren't the usual detritus of civilization washed ashore by currents and tides. These objects showed no signs of corrosion despite their apparent age, no damage from their journey through salt water and crushing pressure. They seemed to pulse with their own inner light, emitting frequencies that caused electronic devices to malfunction when brought too close. Marine biologist Dr. Lisa Park was conducting routine tidal pool surveys along the Oregon coast when she encountered her first artifact. What initially appeared to be an unusual shell turned out to be something far more extraordinary when she examined it under laboratory conditions. The object defied every principle of materials science I knew, Park later testified in a deposition that was immediately classified. It appeared to be organic, but it contained elements that don't exist in nature. The crystalline structure was impossible, mathematical in its precision, and when we subjected it to various tests, it began to respond. According to Park's sealed testimony, the artifact began generating patterns of light and sound when exposed to specific frequencies. The patterns weren't random, they appeared to be responding to human presence, almost as if the object was attempting to communicate. When Park's team tried to document these responses, their equipment began malfunctioning in systematic ways that suggested external interference. But Park's discovery was just one of thousands being reported along Pacific coastlines. Fishermen were hauling up nets filled with objects that resembled technological components rather than marine life. Divers exploring shallow reefs were finding structures that appeared to be growing from the ocean floor, expanding upward toward the surface in geometric patterns that suggested purposeful construction. The most disturbing discoveries came from the deep ocean research stations that were still operating despite the systematic defunding of Pacific exploration programs. Automated monitoring systems deployed in the deepest trenches began detecting massive objects moving through the water column, objects that appeared on sonar as perfectly geometric shapes traveling at impossible speeds. Dr. Michael Torres, operating a deep-sea monitoring station in the Mariana Trench, witnessed something that challenged every assumption about what could exist in the ocean's deepest regions. His automated cameras, designed to capture images of deep-sea life, instead recorded footage of massive structures rising from the ocean floor. They weren't static formations, Torres described in an encrypted communication that was later intercepted and classified. These were mobile architectures, moving with purpose and intelligence. Some appeared to be kilometers in length, others rose vertically like towers or spires. They moved through the water as if gravity and pressure were irrelevant. The footage Torres captured showed these structures deploying smaller objects, what appeared to be reconnaissance devices that spread throughout the surrounding water column. These smaller objects moved with mechanical precision, scanning the environment and transmitting data back to the larger structures through visible beams of energy. But perhaps most unsettling was what appeared to be manufacturing activity taking place around these mobile structures. The deep-sea cameras captured images of materials being extracted from the ocean floor and processed into new forms, construction projects taking place in the crushing depths where no known life should be able to survive, let alone engage in industrial activity. When Torres attempted to share this footage with the scientific community, he discovered that his communication systems had been compromised. His emails were being intercepted, his phone calls monitored, his research data copied and analysed by unknown parties before he could review it himself. Someone was watching everything I did, Torres later revealed. Every discovery, every piece of footage, every measurement was being copied and transmitted somewhere else before I could even process what I was seeing. I was no longer conducting independent research, I was working for someone else without knowing it. The realization that deep-sea research was being systematically monitored and controlled raised disturbing questions about who had the technological capability to conduct such comprehensive surveillance. The equipment required to intercept communications and data transmissions from remote ocean locations suggested resources and capabilities far beyond what any known government or corporation possessed. But the surveillance wasn't limited to professional researchers. Amateur oceanographers, marine enthusiasts, even casual beachcombers were finding their discoveries subject to unusual levels of attention. People who found artifacts along Pacific beaches reported visits from individuals claiming to represent various government agencies, though their credentials and authority were always vague and impossible to verify. Sarah Williams, a retired teacher who collected shells and sea glass as a hobby, encountered these mysterious agents after finding what appeared to be a piece of advanced technology washed up near her home in Santa Barbara. The object, which resembled a sophisticated electronic device despite showing no signs of human manufacture, began displaying unusual properties when she brought it inside. It started responding to my television remote, Williams recounted. Every time I changed channels, the object would pulse with different coloured lights. When I played music, it would vibrate in harmony with the melodies. It was as if it was learning about human technology by observing it. Within days of her discovery, Williams received visitors who identified themselves as representatives of the National Security Agency, though they provided no official documentation and left no contact information. They confiscated the object, along with any photographs Williams had taken, and instructed her to discuss the incident with no one. They knew details about my daily routine that no government agency should have had access to, Williams later revealed. They knew what time I walked the beach, what route I usually took, even personal conversations I'd had with my neighbours. The level of surveillance was beyond anything I thought was possible. Similar encounters were being reported along the entire Pacific coast, creating a pattern of systematic artifact recovery that suggested a coordinated effort to prevent the public from examining these mysterious objects. But the artifacts were appearing faster than they could be collected, washing ashore in increasing numbers despite efforts to retrieve them. The acceleration wasn't limited to surface phenomena. Deep-sea monitoring stations that hadn't been shut down were detecting increasing levels of activity in the ocean's deepest regions. Acoustic sensors were picking up industrial sounds, continuous mechanical noise that suggested massive construction projects taking place in the abyss. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, analysing acoustic data from the Pacific Deep Sound surveillance system, identified patterns in the deep ocean noise that resembled the acoustic signatures of human cities. The sounds included what appeared to be transportation networks, manufacturing facilities, even what might be interpreted as residential areas where different types of activity took place according to regular schedules. We were listening to the sounds of a civilization, Martinez concluded in a report that was immediately classified. Not just individual structures or isolated facilities, but an entire urban infrastructure operating in the deep ocean. The scale was enormous, covering thousands of square miles of ocean floor. The acoustic data suggested that this underwater civilization wasn't primitive or limited in its capabilities. The sounds indicated advanced manufacturing processes, sophisticated transportation systems, and communication networks that spanned vast distances. Whatever existed down there had developed technology that rivaled or exceeded human capabilities, but the most disturbing aspect of Martinez's analysis was the discovery that this underwater infrastructure was expanding. Acoustic signatures indicated new construction projects, the development of additional facilities, and the expansion of existing structures. The civilization beneath the Pacific was growing, preparing for something that required increased capacity and capability. The expansion coincided with increasing reports of unusual phenomena in the Pacific's surface waters. Commercial shipping reported more frequent encounters with unidentified objects that moved through the water at impossible speeds. Military vessels detected signatures that suggested the presence of technologies that shouldn't exist. Captain David Chen, commanding a Navy destroyer on patrol in the Central Pacific, filed a report describing an encounter that challenged every assumption about underwater capabilities. His vessel's sonar detected multiple objects approaching from the deep ocean, objects that appeared on sensors as geometric shapes rather than biological entities. They moved like nothing I'd ever seen, Chen reported. Instant acceleration from stationary to speeds that should have created cavitation bubbles large enough to be visible from the surface. But there were no disturbances, no wakes, no evidence of the massive energy expenditure that such movement should require. According to Chen's account, the objects maintained precise formations while maneuvering around his vessel, apparently scanning or analyzing the ship's structure and capabilities. The encounter lasted for several hours before the objects suddenly descended to depths beyond the reach of his sonar, leaving no trace of their presence except the testimony of his crew. When Chen attempted to file his official report, he was informed that no such encounter had occurred according to satellite surveillance and atmospheric monitoring systems. His crew was debriefed and instructed not to discuss the incident, while the ship's sensor logs were classified and removed from his access. It was as if someone had the capability to edit reality, Chen later stated, to make events disappear from official records while leaving the memories of witnesses intact. The level of control required for such manipulation suggested resources and technology beyond anything I thought existed. The systematic suppression of these encounters was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, as the frequency and visibility of unusual phenomena increased. Too many witnesses were coming forward, too many researchers were refusing to be silenced, and too much evidence was accumulating for traditional suppression methods to remain effective. But perhaps most significantly, the phenomena themselves were becoming more overt, more willing to reveal themselves to human observation. It was as if whatever existed beneath the Pacific had decided that the time for complete secrecy was ending, that gradual disclosure was preferable to sudden revelation. The shift in approach became apparent in the increasing number of daylight sightings reported by civilian observers. Objects that had previously only appeared in remote locations or under cover of darkness were now being observed in broad daylight, often in areas with significant human populations. Off the coast of San Diego, hundreds of witnesses reported seeing massive objects emerging from the ocean during morning rush hour traffic. The objects, described as geometric structures several times larger than any known aircraft, hovered briefly above the water before submerging again into the depths. They wanted to be seen, observed Dr. Patricia Gomez, a psychologist who interviewed dozens of witnesses. The timing, the location, the duration of the sighting all suggested that this was intentional disclosure rather than accidental observation. Something was making a deliberate attempt to acclimate the public to its presence. The psychological impact of these sightings was significant, but it wasn't the panic or hysteria that government agencies had long predicted would result from contact with unknown intelligence. Instead, many witnesses reported feeling a sense of recognition, as if they were remembering something they had forgotten rather than encountering something completely alien. It felt familiar, described Maria Santos, who witnessed the San Diego emergence, like seeing an old friend after years of separation. There was no fear, just a sense that something that belonged here was finally coming home. This psychological response suggested that the intelligence beneath the Pacific had been preparing humanity for contact through subtle influence over long periods of time. The dreams, visions, and psychic experiences reported by people living near Pacific coastlines might have been part of a gradual conditioning process, preparing human consciousness for eventual revelation. Dr. Robert Hayes, continuing his research into the psychological phenomena, discovered that people who had experienced these preparatory visions were significantly less disturbed by direct encounters with unusual phenomena. They seemed to possess knowledge and understanding that allowed them to process experiences that might traumatize unprepared individuals. It was as if they had been educated, Hayes observed, given information and context that allowed them to understand what they were witnessing. The intelligence behind these encounters was demonstrating remarkable sophistication in its approach to contact, The sophistication extended beyond psychological preparation to careful orchestration of the disclosure process itself. The increasing visibility of underwater phenomena followed patterns that suggested strategic planning, with each revelation building upon previous ones to gradually expand public awareness and acceptance. But the intelligence behind this process remained enigmatic, revealing enough to confirm its existence while maintaining the mystery of its ultimate intentions. Each answer raised new questions, each revelation opened new possibilities, each contact suggested depths of knowledge and capability that humanity was only beginning to comprehend. As evidence continued to accumulate and witnesses multiplied, the secret that had been hidden beneath the Pacific for millions of years was approaching full disclosure. The infrastructure of suppression that had kept these discoveries hidden was crumbling under the weight of mounting proof and the systematic revelation of the intelligence that had been orchestrating events from the deep. The abyss was no longer content to remain hidden. It was rising to meet us, bringing with it knowledge and capabilities that would transform our understanding of reality itself. The question was no longer whether contact would occur, but how humanity would respond when it did. The ocean had been patient, waiting millions of years for the right moment to reveal itself. That moment was approaching rapidly, carried on currents that ran deeper than water, guided by intelligence that had been watching and planning since before human civilization began. The deepest mystery on Earth was about to surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. The convergence wasn't happening in isolation. Across the Pacific Rim, ancient sites that had puzzled archaeologists for generations were beginning to exhibit unusual activity. Stone monuments that had stood silent for millennia were now generating electromagnetic fields. Ancient petroglyphs were glowing with an inner light that defied explanation. Structures that had been dismissed as primitive religious sites were revealing themselves to be something far more sophisticated. Easter Island's massive Moai statues, those enigmatic stone figures that have gazed across the Pacific for over 1,000 years, were at the center of these mysterious activations. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, an archaeologist who had spent her career studying Polynesian cultures, was conducting routine measurements of the statues when her instruments detected something extraordinary. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts, Vasquez later described in testimony, that was immediately sealed under national security provisions. These weren't random electromagnetic fluctuations. They were organized, structured, almost like the statues were functioning as some kind of communication array. The electromagnetic signatures emanating from the Moai followed patterns that resembled the pulse sequences detected in the deep Pacific. It was as if the ancient statues were responding to signals from the ocean depths, activating systems that had lain dormant for centuries. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the statues' heads, the only visible portions above ground, were connected to massive body structures buried beneath the island's surface. But more disturbing still, the buried portions of the statues contained what appeared to be technological components. Metallic structures that shouldn't exist in pre-industrial Polynesian culture, geometric patterns that suggested advanced mathematical knowledge, and crystalline formations that pulsed with the same frequencies being detected in the deep ocean. We weren't looking at primitive religious monuments, Vasquez realized. We were looking at ancient technology, communication devices that had been disguised as cultural artifacts. The Moai weren't just statues, they were antennae. Similar discoveries were being made at ancient sites throughout the Pacific region. The stone platforms of Nan Madol in Micronesia, massive basalt structures that had been built using construction techniques that modern engineers still couldn't explain, were generating acoustic signatures that matched the industrial sounds emanating from the ocean floor. The ancient city appeared to be resonating with activity, taking place thousands of miles away in the deepest trenches. In Japan, the underwater formations off Yonaguni that had long been debated as either natural geology or ancient architecture were exhibiting new characteristics. The stepped pyramid structures were glowing with bioluminescent patterns visible from the surface, creating light displays that could be seen from aircraft flying overhead. The patterns weren't random, they followed mathematical sequences that suggested intentional communication. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a marine archaeologist who had studied the Yonaguni formations for decades, witnessed their transformation with a mixture of awe and terror. They were coming alive, he described. Structures that had been dormant for thousands of years were suddenly active, responding to something happening in the deeper parts of the ocean. The activation of these ancient sites suggested a network that spanned the entire Pacific basin. connecting surface monuments to deep-sea installations through communication systems that had been hidden for millennia. The intelligence beneath the waves hadn't just been observing human development, it had been guiding it, leaving markers and communication nodes throughout the regions where human civilizations would eventually develop. But the guidance hadn't been limited to ancient times. Modern analysis of Pacific Rim urban development revealed patterns that suggested long-term planning by non-human intelligence. Major cities had been built in locations that formed geometric relationships with underwater thermal anomalies. Transportation networks followed routes that aligned with deep-sea communication arrays. Even the placement of military installations and research facilities seemed to follow a master plan that served purposes beyond human strategic thinking. Dr. Amanda Foster, the marine archaeologist whose research had been suppressed, managed to compile data from multiple sources before disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Her final report, discovered on encrypted servers after her disappearance, revealed the scope of what humanity was facing. We're not dealing with a recently active underwater civilization, Foster's report concluded. We're dealing with an intelligence that has been actively involved in shaping human development for thousands of years. Our cities, our trade routes, our technological development, all of it has been influenced by something operating from the ocean depths. The implications were staggering. If Foster's analysis was correct, human civilization hadn't developed independently. It had been guided, shaped, and directed by intelligence that had been planning for this moment for millennia. The sudden acceleration of contact wasn't random, it was the culmination of a long-term project that was finally reaching its completion phase. Evidence supporting Foster's conclusion was emerging from unexpected sources. Linguists studying Pacific Island languages discovered root words that appeared in cultures separated by thousands of miles of ocean, suggesting common origins that predated known human migration patterns. The shared vocabulary wasn't limited to basic concepts, it included sophisticated technical terms that described underwater phenomena and deep-sea navigation techniques. Dr. James Mitchell, a comparative linguist who specialized in oceanic languages, identified over 200 words that appeared across Pacific cultures with identical meanings related to underwater technology and deep-sea communication. The consistency of these terms suggested they had been learned from a common source, passed down through generations as sacred knowledge. These weren't words that primitive islanders would have developed independently, Mitchell observed. They were technical specifications, operating procedures, communication protocols. It was as if these cultures had been given instruction manuals for interacting with something beneath the ocean. The instruction manuals were beginning to make sense as the phenomena in the Pacific intensified. The thermal signatures visible from satellites were forming increasingly complex patterns, creating what appeared to be navigational charts for surface vessels. The acoustic pulses from the deep ocean were organizing into sequences that resembled countdown timers, marking time towards some significant event. Marine traffic throughout the Pacific began experiencing coordinated guidance, with vessels reporting that their navigation systems were being overridden by external signals that directed them towards specific coordinates. The override signals were too sophisticated to resist, taking control of ships' steering and propulsion systems with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of human technology. Captain Maria Santos, commanding a research vessel in the Central Pacific, experienced this guidance firsthand when her ship was directed to coordinates where no charted features existed. Upon arrival, her crew witnessed something that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the open ocean. The water began to glow, Santos reported in an encrypted communication. Not just bioluminescence we were familiar with, but structured light patterns that formed geometric shapes across square miles of ocean surface. It was like looking at a city from above, but the city was made of light and it was floating on the water. The light patterns weren't static. They pulsed and shifted, forming sequences that appeared to be some form of communication. Santos's crew attempted to respond using their ship's lights, flashing patterns in response to what they observed. To their amazement, the ocean lights responded, creating increasingly complex interactions that suggested genuine communication was taking place. We were having a conversation, Santos realized. Something vast and intelligent was speaking to us using the entire ocean as its voice, and it was teaching us how to respond. The conversation wasn't limited to Santos's vessel. Ships throughout the Pacific were reporting similar encounters, with the ocean itself becoming a medium for communication between surface vessels and something far below. The interactions followed protocols that suggested the underwater intelligence had been studying human communication methods. and had developed interfaces specifically designed for human comprehension. But the communications weren't just friendly exchanges. Many of the messages carried warnings about impending changes to Earth's climate and geology. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was sharing information about seismic instabilities, volcanic activities, and climate shifts that hadn't yet been detected by human monitoring systems. Dr. Sarah Chen, analysing these communications patterns, discovered that the warnings were remarkably accurate. Predictions about earthquake activity, volcanic eruptions, and weather patterns were consistently proven correct days or weeks after they were received. The underwater intelligence possessed monitoring capabilities that far exceeded human technology. They were trying to help us, Chen concluded, sharing information that could save lives, providing advance warning about natural disasters. But their knowledge was so far ahead of ours that we were having trouble understanding the full scope of what they were telling us. The warnings became increasingly urgent as 2024 progressed, with messages indicating that major geological changes were approaching that would affect the entire Pacific region. The intelligence was describing shifts in tectonic plates, changes in ocean currents, and volcanic activities that could reshape coastlines and alter global climate patterns. But perhaps most significantly, the communication suggested that these changes weren't entirely natural. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was describing its own role in managing Earth's geological systems, revealing that it had been actively maintaining planetary stability for millions of years. The recent acceleration of climate change and geological instability wasn't just the result of human activity, it was the consequence of the underwater civilization preparing to reveal itself, reducing its behind-the-scenes management of Earth systems. They've been keeping the planet stable, Chen realized with growing alarm. Preventing major catastrophes, managing volcanic activity, controlling seismic forces. But now they're withdrawing that management, either because they're preparing to make contact openly or because they're preparing to leave. The implications were terrifying. If an advanced intelligence had been secretly managing Earth's geological system for millions of years, its withdrawal could trigger catastrophic changes that human technology would be powerless to prevent. The recent increase in extreme weather, volcanic activity, and seismic events might be just the beginning of a period of instability that could threaten human civilization itself. But the intelligence wasn't abandoning Earth without leaving instructions. The communications reaching Pacific Rim research stations included detailed information about geological management techniques, technologies for predicting and controlling seismic activity, and methods for maintaining atmospheric and oceanic stability. It was as if they were attempting to transfer responsibility for planetary management to humanity. Dr. Robert Hayes, continuing his research into the psychological aspects of the contact phenomenon, discovered that individuals who had been experiencing preparatory visions were receiving detailed technical information about these planetary management systems. The knowledge was being downloaded directly into human consciousness, creating a new class of individuals who understood technologies that mainstream science hadn't yet discovered. They were training successors, Hayes concluded, preparing humans to take over functions that they had been performing for millions of years. The contact wasn't just about revealing their existence, it was about transferring responsibility for Earth's stability to its surface inhabitants. The transfer of knowledge was accelerating as the phenomena in the Pacific intensified. More people were experiencing the preparatory visions, receiving technical information that would become crucial for managing the planet's systems. But the knowledge came with warnings about the challenges humanity would face in taking over these responsibilities. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was ancient beyond human comprehension, with capabilities that had developed over millions of years of planetary stewardship. Their technology was integrated into Earth's geological systems at the most fundamental levels, managing forces that human science was only beginning to understand. Transferring such responsibilities to a species that had only recently developed industrial technology was a process fraught with dangers. But the transfer was inevitable. The patterns detected in the deep ocean indicated that the underwater civilization was preparing for a transition that would fundamentally alter its relationship with Earth's surface. Whether this meant open contact, departure, or some other form of change, the intelligence was clearly preparing humanity for a future where it would need to assume responsibilities it had never imagined. The question wasn't whether humanity was ready for such responsibilities. The question was whether it could learn fast enough to prevent catastrophic failures in systems it hadn't known existed. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was providing instruction, but the learning curve was steep and the consequences of failure could affect the entire planet. As thermal anomalies intensified and acoustic patterns became more urgent, it became clear that the transition was approaching rapidly. The secret that had been hidden beneath the Pacific for millions of years wasn't just rising to the surface, it was preparing to hand over the keys to planetary management to a species that had been unaware it was even a passenger on a managed world. The abyss had been Earth's caretaker since before human evolution began. Now it was time for humanity to learn that with the revelation of that ancient secret would come responsibilities beyond our wildest imagination. The ocean had been patient, but its patience was ending. The time for transition had arrived, and in the crushing depths where no human had ever ventured, vast intelligences were preparing to emerge from the shadows they had occupied since the dawn of geological time. They were bringing with them knowledge that would transform human understanding of reality, but also burdens that would test our species' capacity for stewardship of a planet whose true complexity we were only beginning to comprehend. The deepest mystery on Earth was about to become humanity's greatest responsibility, and whether we were ready or not, the handover was beginning. The handover wasn't happening in some distant future or abstract timeline. It was occurring right now, in real time, as monitoring stations across the Pacific detected massive movements in the ocean's deepest regions. Something enormous was rising from trenches that had remained undisturbed for millions of years, ascending through pressure zones that should have crushed any known form of life. Dr. Catherine Walsh was manning the overnight shift at the Pacific Deep Monitoring Array when her screens lit up with readings that defied every law of physics she understood. Objects the size of mountain ranges were moving through the water column at speeds that created no turbulence, no displacement, no acoustic signature beyond the purposeful pulse patterns that had become increasingly familiar to researchers who hadn't yet been silenced. The scale was incomprehensible, Walsh later described in testimony that was classified within hours of its recording. We weren't tracking individual craft or even fleets. We were watching entire cities in motion, ascending from depths that our deepest submersibles had never reached. And they were moving with coordination that suggested a single controlling intelligence. The ascending formations weren't random migrations or responses to environmental changes. They were following predetermined paths, rising along specific routes that had been mapped out with mathematical precision. As they ascended, they deployed smaller objects that spread throughout the surrounding water, creating a three-dimensional network of monitoring and communication devices. But the most disturbing aspect of Walsh's observations was the realization that this movement had been orchestrated to coincide with specific astronomical events. The major ascensions occurred during new moons, when tidal forces were at their weakest and human satellite surveillance was most limited by darkness. It was as if the intelligence coordinating these movements possessed intimate knowledge of both terrestrial physics and human observation capabilities. The coordination extended beyond the ocean itself. As the deep sea formations rose, corresponding activities began occurring at surface locations throughout the Pacific Rim. Ancient monuments that had been dormant for centuries started exhibiting synchronized behaviors, their electromagnetic signatures pulsing in harmony with the movements far below. Dr. Elena Vasquez, still monitoring the Easter Island Moai despite official instructions to cease her research, witnessed the statue's transformation reach a new level of intensity. The electromagnetic fields they generated were no longer just communication signals, they were becoming transportation beacons, creating corridors of energy that extended from the island's surface down into the ocean depths. The Moai weren't just receiving signals anymore, Vasquez observed. They were actively facilitating movement between the surface and the deep ocean. The energy corridors they created were like pathways, allowing something to travel between dimensions that had been separated for millions of years. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the buried portions of the statues contained chambers that were filling with some form of energy or substance that hadn't been there before. The chambers were arranged in patterns that suggested they were components of a larger system, nodes in a network that spanned not just Easter Island but the entire Pacific Basin. Similar transformations were occurring at ancient sites throughout the region. The stone platforms of Nan Madol were generating acoustic fields that created standing wave patterns in the surrounding lagoon, forming geometric shapes in the water that persisted for hours despite tidal movements. The Yonaguni formations were projecting holographic images into the water column above them, displaying complex mathematical formulas and star charts that suggested knowledge of cosmic phenomena far beyond human understanding. But perhaps most significant were the changes occurring at locations that had never been recognized as ancient sites at all. Underwater formations that had been dismissed as natural geology were revealing themselves to be artificial structures as they became active, their true nature becoming apparent only as they began fulfilling their designed functions. Dr. Michael Torres, still operating his deep-sea monitoring station despite official pressure to shut down, detected massive structures rising from what had appeared to be empty ocean floor. The structures emerged slowly, their surfaces covered with growth that had accumulated over millennia of concealment, but their underlying architecture was clearly artificial. Right, they had been hiding in plain sight, Torres realized. Disguised as natural formations, covered with biological growth, indistinguishable from the surrounding geology until they activated. The entire Pacific floor could be riddled with similar structures that we've never recognized. The revelation that the ocean floor itself might be largely artificial, a constructed environment rather than a natural one, forced a complete re-evaluation of human understanding of Earth's history. If advanced intelligence had been reshaping the planet's surface for millions of years, then virtually everything humans thought they knew about geology, biology, and planetary evolution was based on false assumptions. The implications extended far beyond academic understanding. If the ocean floor was an artificial construction, then the recent increase in seismic activity and volcanic eruptions might be the result of ancient systems being reactivated rather than natural geological processes. The intelligence responsible for these systems was bringing them online after eons of dormancy, preparing for operations that would affect the entire planet. Evidence supporting this conclusion was mounting as geological monitoring stations detected patterns in earthquake activity that defied natural explanation. Seismic events were occurring in sequences that suggested they were being triggered deliberately, following mathematical progressions that indicated intelligent control rather than random tectonic forces. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, analyzing seismic data from the Pacific Ring of Fire, discovered that recent earthquake patterns were creating geometric shapes when plotted on geological maps. The epicenters formed perfect circles, triangles, and more complex geometric figures that could only be the result of intentional design. The Earth itself was being used as a canvas, Martinez concluded in a report that was immediately seized by security agencies. Something was drawing patterns in seismic activity, using earthquake epicenters as points in massive geometric constructions that spanned thousands of miles. The geometric patterns weren't random artistic expressions. They corresponded to star charts, mathematical formulas, and navigation routes that suggested they were serving as signals or instructions for intelligences operating on a cosmic scale. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was communicating not just with surface dwellers, but with observers throughout the solar system and beyond. Astronomical observatories began detecting responsive signals from various locations in space as the seismic patterns became more complex. Radio telescopes picked up transmissions from the asteroid belt, the outer planets, and even more distant locations that appeared to be acknowledging the signals being transmitted from Earth through geological activity. Dr. Robert Chen, operating a radio telescope array dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, found himself receiving signals that originated not from distant star systems, but from within our own solar system. The transmissions were clearly artificial, containing mathematical proofs and scientific data that demonstrated knowledge far beyond human capabilities. We weren't just detecting intelligence from beneath the Pacific, Chen realized. We were discovering that our entire solar system contains active intelligences that have been monitoring Earth's development. The underwater civilization wasn't isolated. It was part of a network that spans the cosmos. The network appeared to be preparing for some form of convergence, an event that would bring together intelligence from various locations throughout the solar system. The signals intercepted by Chen's equipment indicated that representatives from multiple worlds and dimensions were planning to gather in the Pacific region for purposes that weren't yet clear to human observers. But the gathering wasn't intended to exclude humanity. The preparatory visions experienced by individuals throughout the Pacific Rim were intensifying, with recipients receiving detailed information about protocols for interacting with non-human intelligences. The psychological conditioning that had been ongoing for decades was reaching its completion phase, preparing selected humans to serve as intermediaries during the convergence. Dr. Robert Hayes, tracking the psychological phenomena, discovered that individuals who had been experiencing the preparatory visions were beginning to demonstrate capabilities that suggested direct neural interface with the underwater intelligence. They could predict seismic events, communicate telepathically across vast distances, and access information about cosmic phenomena that they couldn't have learned through normal human education. They were becoming bridges, Hayes observed. Human consciousness was being modified to serve as a communication interface between terrestrial and cosmic intelligences. The individuals experiencing these changes weren't losing their humanity, they were gaining additional capabilities that would allow them to function in a much larger context. The modifications weren't limited to psychological changes. Medical examinations of individuals who had experienced intense preparatory visions revealed physical alterations that suggested their nervous systems were being adapted for interaction with technologies and environments that didn't exist on Earth's surface. Their brain structures showed new neural pathways that appeared to be designed for processing information at speeds and volumes far beyond normal human capacity, but the changes weren't forced or involuntary. The individuals experiencing them reported feeling more complete, more connected to the larger universe than they had ever felt before. The modifications enhanced their existing capabilities rather than replacing them, suggesting that the intelligence responsible for these changes understood and respected human nature. "It felt like remembering something I had forgotten," described Maria Santos, who had experienced some of the most intense preparatory visions. "Like discovering capabilities I had always possessed but never known how to access. I wasn't becoming something alien, I was becoming more fully human than I had ever been before." The enhancement of human capabilities was accelerating as the convergence approached. More individuals were experiencing the preparatory visions, and the intensity of the modifications was increasing. It was as if the intelligence responsible for these changes was working against a deadline, preparing as many humans as possible for roles they would need to fulfill in a transformed world. The transformation wasn't limited to individual humans. Entire communities near Pacific coastlines were beginning to exhibit coordinated behaviors that suggested collective consciousness was emerging. Groups of people would simultaneously receive the same visions, experience identical dreams, and demonstrate synchronized responses to phenomena that others couldn't detect. Dr. Patricia Gomez, studying these collective behaviors, discovered that communities experiencing them were developing shared knowledge and capabilities that enhanced their ability to interact with the unusual phenomena appearing in their regions. They could predict when unusual objects would emerge from the ocean, coordinate responses to electromagnetic anomalies, and even influence the behavior of the phenomena through focused collective intention. "We were witnessing the emergence of a new form of human consciousness," Gomez observed. Communities were becoming single organisms with distributed intelligence, capable of interacting with non-human intelligences as equals rather than subjects. The development of collective consciousness appeared to be part of the intelligence's strategy for managing the convergence. Rather than attempting to communicate with 7 billion individual humans, the underwater civilization was creating network nodes of enhanced consciousness that could serve as communication interfaces for entire populations. But the strategy also served to protect humanity from the psychological shock of direct contact with intelligences that operated on cosmic scales. The gradual development of enhanced consciousness allowed humans to adapt to concepts and realities that might otherwise prove overwhelming or destructive to unprepared minds. The protection was proving necessary as the phenomena in the Pacific intensified beyond anything previously recorded. Thermal signatures visible from space were creating patterns so complex they required supercomputer analysis to decode. Acoustic signals from the deep ocean were generating standing waves that affected weather patterns across the entire Pacific basin. Electromagnetic anomalies were disrupting satellite communications and GPS systems throughout the region. But most significantly, the boundary between the ocean and the atmosphere was beginning to blur in specific locations. Witnesses reported seeing water that behaved like gas, air that supported marine life, and regions where the laws of physics appeared to operate according to different principles than those governing the rest of Earth's environment. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, studying these boundary anomalies, discovered that they occurred at locations where the ascending deep-sea formations approached the ocean's surface. The intelligence rising from the depths was bringing with it environmental conditions that didn't match Earth's normal parameters, creating pockets of altered reality where different physical laws applied. "We were seeing the emergence of interdimensional spaces," Mitchell concluded, regions where the normal rules of physics were suspended and replaced with principles that allowed for forms of existence that couldn't survive in standard Earth conditions. The intelligence wasn't just visiting our dimension, it was creating spaces where it could exist comfortably. The interdimensional spaces were expanding as more formations rose from the deep ocean, creating a network of altered reality zones throughout the Pacific. Within these zones, human observers reported encountering structures and entities that defied normal physical laws, suggesting that the convergence would involve not just communication between different intelligences, but interaction between different dimensions of reality itself. The implications were staggering. The intelligence beneath the Pacific wasn't just more advanced than humanity, it existed in a fundamentally different type of reality, one where consciousness and matter interacted according to principles that human science hadn't yet discovered. The convergence would require humanity to expand its understanding of reality itself, embracing concepts that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence. But the intelligence was providing guidance for this expansion of understanding. The technical information being transmitted through the preparatory visions included instructions for constructing devices that could detect and interact with interdimensional phenomena. Humans were being taught to build technologies that would allow them to function in the altered reality zones that were spreading throughout the Pacific. The construction of these devices was already beginning, as individuals and communities with enhanced consciousness started building equipment based on the designs they had received through their visions. The devices resembled no human technology, incorporating principles of physics that mainstream science hadn't yet accepted, but they functioned exactly as the transmitted instructions indicated they would. Dr. Amanda Foster, working from hiding after her official research had been suppressed, managed to analyze some of these human-built devices before disappearing completely from public view. Her final report, transmitted through encrypted channels, described technologies that seemed to operate by manipulating the fundamental structure of reality itself. These weren't machines in any sense we understand, Foster reported. They were reality modification devices that changed the local physics to allow for impossible things to occur. The humans building them didn't fully understand how they worked, but they were following instructions that produced functional technologies that shouldn't exist. The proliferation of these impossible technologies was accelerating as the convergence approached, with communities throughout the Pacific Rim constructing devices and structures that prepared them for interaction with intelligences and realities that operated according to different physical principles. Humanity was being equipped with tools for a future that would require capabilities no human civilization had ever possessed. The future was arriving faster than anyone had anticipated, carried on currents that ran deeper than water, guided by intelligence that had been planning this moment since before human consciousness existed. The secret that had been hidden beneath the Pacific was finally breaking the surface, bringing with it knowledge, technologies, and responsibilities that would transform not just human understanding, but human existence itself. The abyss had been patient, but its patience was ending. The time for revelation had arrived, and with it would come challenges and opportunities that would determine whether humanity could evolve to meet the demands of a universe far stranger and more complex than we had ever imagined. In the deepest trenches of the Pacific, ancient intelligences were preparing to emerge from the shadows they had occupied since the dawn of time. They were bringing gifts and burdens, technologies and responsibilities, knowledge and challenges that would either elevate humanity to a new level of existence or reveal the limits of our species' capacity for growth. The convergence was beginning, the future was rising from the depths, and humanity was about to discover that the greatest mystery on Earth was about to become our greatest transformation. The transformation wasn't happening gradually anymore. By late 2024, the changes occurring throughout the Pacific had reached a critical threshold where denial became impossible and suppression became futile. Too many people had witnessed phenomena that challenged the fundamental assumptions of reality itself. Too many monitoring stations had recorded data that contradicted every law of physics taught in universities. Too many ancient sites had activated simultaneously for the pattern to be dismissed as coincidence or natural occurrence. The tipping point came on a Tuesday morning in October, when every seismic monitoring station on the Pacific Rim detected the same impossible signature simultaneously. Not an earthquake, not volcanic activity, but something that registered as if the entire ocean floor was breathing. A rhythmic expansion and contraction that spanned thousands of miles, pulsing with the regularity of a massive heartbeat deep beneath the waves. Dr. Lisa Park, the marine biologist who had first encountered the mysterious artifacts on Oregon beaches, was among the first to realize what the synchronized readings meant. Despite having her research credentials revoked and her career effectively ended, She had continued monitoring Pacific phenomena through unofficial channels and personal equipment. It wasn't just breathing, Park later explained in an underground documentary that would never see official distribution. It was awakening. Something vast beyond human comprehension was stirring from a sleep that had lasted geological ages, and it was doing so with the deliberate purpose of someone who had been waiting for exactly the right moment. The awakening triggered cascading effects throughout the Pacific ecosystem that made the previous year's anomalies seem minor by comparison. Whale populations that had been exhibiting unusual migration patterns suddenly began gathering in specific locations, forming massive congregations that numbered in the tens of thousands. But they weren't just gathering, they were arranging themselves in geometric patterns that matched the formations detected on the ocean floor. Marine photographer David Kim, documenting one of these whale gatherings off the coast of California, captured images that defied biological explanation. They were organizing themselves into perfect spirals, concentric circles, even complex fractals, Kim described. But it wasn't random schooling behavior. They were creating patterns that required mathematical understanding, positioning themselves with precision that would challenge human engineers. The whales weren't just arranging themselves in patterns, they were generating coordinated vocalizations that created acoustic structures in the water itself. The combined songs of thousands of marine mammals were forming standing waves, three-dimensional sound sculptures that persisted for hours despite the movement of currents and tides. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, analyzing recordings of these acoustic phenomena, discovered that the whale songs were harmonizing with the pulse patterns emanating from the deep ocean. The marine mammals were serving as a biological amplification system, taking signals from the depths and broadcasting them in frequencies that could travel across entire ocean basins. The whales had become living communication relays, Martinez realized with growing amazement. They were part of a vast organic network that was awakening along with whatever existed in the deep ocean. Nature itself was being conscripted into a communication system of incomprehensible complexity. But the marine mammals weren't the only biological systems responding to the awakening. Coral reefs throughout the Pacific began exhibiting synchronized behaviors that marine biologists had never documented. Entire reef systems would pulse with bioluminescent light in coordinated patterns, creating underwater light shows that could be seen from aircraft flying overhead. The coral formations weren't just displaying random light patterns, they were generating what appeared to be complex data streams. Marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen, studying the luminescent displays, discovered that the light patterns contained mathematical sequences, geometric proofs, and what appeared to be star charts showing celestial configurations from various points throughout the galaxy. The coral wasn't just alive in the conventional sense, Chen observed. It was functioning as a biological computer, processing and displaying information that originated from sources far beyond Earth's biosphere. We were looking at organic technology that blurred the line between life and machine. The integration of biological and technological systems was accelerating as the awakening continued. Fish populations began exhibiting coordinated behaviors that resembled the movement patterns of sophisticated machinery, swimming in formations that created hydrodynamic effects impossible for natural schooling behavior to achieve. Commercial fishing vessels throughout the Pacific reported encounters with fish schools that moved with mechanical precision, creating vortex patterns in the water that generated their own current systems. The fish weren't just swimming, they were engineering water flow on a massive scale, creating transportation networks that allowed other marine life to travel vast distances with minimal energy expenditure. Captain Elena Rodriguez, whose previous encounter with geometric underwater objects had been officially denied, witnessed the transformation of marine ecosystems firsthand during a routine cargo run between Tokyo and Los Angeles. The entire ocean was becoming organized, she reported in encrypted communications with independent researchers. Schools of fish were creating highways in the water, whale pods were functioning as communication towers, and the coral reefs were processing data like living computers. The organization extended beyond individual species to encompass entire ecosystems. Regions of the Pacific that had maintained stable biological patterns for thousands of years were suddenly reconfiguring themselves according to principles that seemed more technological than natural. Predator-prey relationships were being reorganized, migration routes were being optimized, and feeding patterns were being coordinated to maximize the efficiency of energy transfer throughout the system. Dr. Michael Torres, still monitoring deep-sea activity despite official pressure to cease his research, detected massive movements of biological material in the ocean depths. Entire ecosystems appeared to be relocating themselves, moving from traditional habitats to positions that aligned with the geometric patterns being generated by the awakening intelligence. We were witnessing the creation of a living machine, Torres concluded in his final transmission, before his monitoring station went offline permanently. The intelligence beneath the Pacific wasn't just awakening, it was converting the entire ocean into a single, integrated organism capable of functions we couldn't begin to comprehend. The conversion process was accelerating beyond the marine environment to affect atmospheric and terrestrial systems throughout the Pacific Rim. Weather patterns that had remained relatively stable for decades began exhibiting behaviors that meteorologists couldn't explain using conventional atmospheric models. Storm systems were forming in geometric shapes, maintaining precise boundaries that defied the chaotic nature of atmospheric dynamics. Hurricanes and typhoons were following paths that created complex patterns when viewed from satellite imagery, their trajectories forming mathematical relationships that suggested intelligent control rather than natural atmospheric forces. Dr. Catherine Walsh, analysing satellite weather data, discovered that the unusual storm patterns were creating electromagnetic effects that enhanced communication between various Pacific phenomena. The storms weren't just weather systems, Walsh realised. They were components of a vast atmospheric communication network that was being integrated with the oceanic and biological systems to create a planet-wide information processing matrix. The integration was occurring at speeds that suggested the intelligence responsible for these changes possessed capabilities that operated on entirely different timescales than human technology. Systems that should have required decades to establish were being implemented in weeks, with coordination that implied instantaneous communication across vast distances. But perhaps most significantly, the changes weren't limited to Earth itself. Astronomical observatories began detecting responsive activities throughout the solar system as the Pacific awakening intensified. Objects in the asteroid belt were adjusting their orbits, following trajectories that created geometric alignments with Earth's position. Electromagnetic signatures from the outer planets were shifting in patterns that matched the pulse sequences emanating from the Pacific depths. Dr. Robert Chen, operating his radio telescope array in isolation after his official research funding had been terminated, intercepted communications between various locations throughout the solar system that indicated a coordinated response to the awakening beneath the Pacific. "We weren't just dealing with an isolated intelligence on Earth," Chen reported in his final public transmission. "We were discovering that our entire solar system contains active networks that have been dormant for eons, all of which were being activated by whatever was rising from the Pacific depths." The solar system-wide activation suggested that the intelligence beneath the Pacific was part of a much larger network, one that spanned not just Earth's oceans but extended throughout the cosmic neighborhood. The awakening wasn't just the emergence of a hidden terrestrial civilization, it was the reactivation of an interplanetary communication and coordination system that had been waiting for the appropriate moment to resume operations. The moment had apparently arrived with humanity's development of technologies capable of detecting and potentially interfering with these ancient systems. The intelligence had remained hidden as long as human capabilities posed no threat to their operations. But the rapid advancement of human technology in recent decades had reached a threshold that required direct intervention. Evidence supporting this conclusion emerged from analysis of the timing of various phenomena. The acceleration of unusual activities in the Pacific coincided precisely with human achievements in deep-sea exploration, satellite surveillance, and electromagnetic sensing technologies. It was as if the intelligence had been monitoring human technological development and had predetermined trigger points where concealment would no longer be possible. The trigger points weren't just technological, they were also biological and psychological. The preparatory visions experienced by individuals throughout the Pacific Rim were reaching completion, creating a population of humans capable of serving as intermediaries between conventional human consciousness and the awakening intelligence. These individuals were reporting that their enhanced capabilities were reaching full development, just as the phenomena in the Pacific were approaching maximum intensity. Dr. Robert Hayes, documenting the psychological aspects of the contact phenomenon, discovered that the timing of individual consciousness enhancement was precisely coordinated with the awakening of specific aspects of the intelligence network. Each person who experienced the preparatory visions was being prepared for a specific role in the coming interaction, Hayes observed. The intelligence wasn't just making contact, It was recruiting human partners for a collaboration that would transform both species. The collaboration was already beginning as enhanced individuals throughout the Pacific Rim started receiving detailed instructions for constructing interface technologies that would allow direct communication between human consciousness and the awakening intelligence. The devices being built based on these instructions resembled no human technology, but functioned exactly as specified, creating communication channels that operated through principles of physics that mainstream science hadn't yet discovered. Maria Santos, one of the most extensively modified individuals, described the experience of using these interface devices as remembering how to speak a language I had always known but forgotten. The communication wasn't limited to information exchange, it included direct sharing of sensory experiences, emotional states, and conceptual frameworks that allowed human consciousness to comprehend realities that existed beyond normal human perception. I could see through their senses, Santos explained. Experience the ocean depths as they experienced them, understand time and space from their perspective, feel the connections between different dimensions of reality that we don't normally perceive. It wasn't alien, it was like discovering capabilities I had always possessed but never learned to access. The communication revealed that the intelligence beneath the Pacific existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, experiencing reality in ways that allowed them to perceive past, present, and future as a single integrated phenomenon. Their awakening wasn't just the emergence from dormancy, it was the expansion of their presence into dimensions of reality that intersected with human experience. The expansion was creating the interdimensional spaces that researchers had detected throughout the Pacific, regions where the normal laws of physics were modified to accommodate forms of existence that couldn't survive in standard Earth conditions. But these spaces weren't just alien environments, they were collaborative zones where human and non-human consciousness could interact on equal terms. Dr. Patricia Gomez, studying communities that had developed collective consciousness capabilities, discovered that these groups were beginning to establish permanent settlements in some of the interdimensional zones. The communities reported that existence within these altered reality regions enhanced their capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity. They weren't losing their human nature, Gomez observed. They were expanding it, gaining access to aspects of consciousness and reality that humans had always possessed the potential to experience but never learned to access. The interdimensional zones weren't alien territories, they were expanded versions of human habitat. The expansion of human habitat was accelerating as more interdimensional zones manifested throughout the Pacific region. Entire coastal areas were beginning to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, creating spaces where conventional physical limitations didn't apply and where consciousness could directly influence material reality. But the expansion wasn't occurring randomly or without purpose. The intelligence coordinating these changes was implementing a careful plan that would gradually integrate human civilization with the larger cosmic network while preserving the essential characteristics that made humanity unique within the galactic community. The plan was far more complex and far-reaching than simple contact between two species. It involved the transformation of Earth itself into a multidimensional habitat, capable of supporting forms of life and consciousness that existed throughout the galaxy. The Pacific Ocean was serving as the primary interface zone where this transformation would be tested and refined before being extended to the entire planet. The testing phase was approaching completion, as phenomena throughout the Pacific reached unprecedented levels of intensity and coordination. Thermal signatures visible from space were creating patterns of such complexity that they required artificial intelligence systems to decode their mathematical relationships. Acoustic signals from the deep ocean were generating standing waves that affected global weather patterns and tectonic activity. Electromagnetic anomalies were creating communication channels that connected Earth directly to intelligence networks throughout the solar system and beyond. But most significantly, the boundary between hidden and revealed was dissolving completely as the intelligence beneath the Pacific prepared to emerge fully into human awareness. The age of concealment was ending, and with it would come revelations that would transform not just human understanding of the universe, but humanity's role within a cosmic community that had been waiting eons for Earth's inhabitants to develop the capabilities necessary for full participation. The awakening was nearly complete. The transformation was accelerating beyond the ability of any human institution to control or suppress. The secret that had been hidden beneath the Pacific for millions of years was about to become humanity's greatest opportunity for evolution into something far greater than we had ever imagined possible. In the depths where pressure should have crushed any known form of life, ancient intelligences were preparing to break the surface and extend an invitation to join a galactic community that spanned dimensions and defied every limitation humans had accepted about the nature of existence itself. The abyss had been patient for eons, but its patience was ending. The time for revelation had arrived, and with it would come the opportunity for humanity to discover that we had never been alone in the universe, and that our greatest adventure was just beginning. The surface tension between dimensions was beginning to fracture in ways that made concealment impossible, even for those still desperately clinging to the old paradigms. By November of 2024, civilian aircraft flying over the central Pacific were encountering pockets of space where their instruments registered impossible readings, altitude measurements that showed them simultaneously at sea level and 30,000 feet, GPS coordinates that placed them in multiple locations at once, radio communications that echoed back from the future. Captain James Morrison, a veteran pilot with 25 years of experience flying trans-Pacific routes, found himself at the center of an encounter that would fundamentally alter his understanding of reality itself. During what should have been a routine flight from San Francisco to Manila, his aircraft entered a zone where the very fabric of space-time seemed to fold in on itself. We were cruising at our normal altitude when every instrument on the plane started giving contradictory readings, Morrison later testified in a sealed hearing that was immediately classified. But it wasn't equipment malfunction. The instruments were working perfectly. Reality itself was malfunctioning, showing us multiple versions of the same moment existing simultaneously. Morrison's passengers reported seeing the ocean below them transform into what appeared to be a vast crystal city, its spires reaching up toward the aircraft while somehow remaining beneath the water's surface. The geometric structures pulsed with colours that didn't exist in the normal human visual spectrum, yet everyone aboard could perceive them clearly. It was like looking at a hologram that was more real than reality, described passenger Dr. Angela Foster, who had no connection to the suppressed marine archaeologist of the same name. The city was there and not there, underwater and in the air, ancient and futuristic all at the same time. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing, but somehow I understood it completely. The aircraft's communication systems began receiving transmissions that originated from the crystal city below, messages that bypassed the radio equipment entirely and spoke directly into the consciousness of everyone aboard. The communications weren't in any human language, yet they were perfectly comprehensible, conveying complex concepts about dimensional mechanics and consciousness expansion that the recipients somehow already understood. Morrison attempted to report the encounter to air traffic control, but discovered that according to radar tracking systems, his aircraft had never deviated from its planned route and was maintaining normal altitude and speed throughout the flight. From the perspective of ground-based observers, nothing unusual was occurring, despite the fact that everyone aboard the aircraft was experiencing a reality that defied every law of physics. We were existing in two realities simultaneously, Morrison realized with growing amazement. One where we were just another commercial flight crossing the Pacific, and another where we were exploring dimensions of existence that shouldn't be possible. Both realities were completely real, completely valid, completely true at the same time. The dual reality experiences weren't limited to aircraft encounters. Throughout the Pacific Rim, individuals and entire communities were beginning to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states, accessing versions of reality where the normal limitations of physics, biology, and consciousness no longer applied. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, still studying the interdimensional zones despite official pressure to cease her research, discovered that these multidimensional experiences were becoming increasingly common among populations near Pacific coastlines. People weren't losing touch with normal reality, Mitchell observed. They were gaining access to expanded versions of reality while maintaining their ability to function in conventional dimensional space. The expanded realities weren't random or chaotic. They followed consistent patterns that suggested they were aspects of a larger, more complex universe that humans had always existed within, but had never learned to perceive. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was teaching humanity to access these additional dimensions of existence, revealing that what we had considered reality was actually just a narrow slice of a much vaster cosmic environment. The teaching process was accelerating as more individuals developed the enhanced consciousness capabilities that allowed them to navigate multidimensional existence safely. The preparatory visions that had been occurring for years were reaching their intended culmination, creating a population of humans who could serve as guides for others, making the transition to expanded awareness. Maria Santos, whose consciousness modifications had progressed further than most, found herself serving as an unofficial coordinator for individuals experiencing dimensional expansion throughout the Pacific region. "It's not about losing who we are," she explained to groups of newly awakened individuals. "It's about discovering who we've always been but never realized we could become." The coordination wasn't just psychological support. Santos and others like her were receiving detailed instructions for establishing permanent settlements in the stable interdimensional zones that were manifesting throughout the Pacific. These settlements would serve as transition points where humans could gradually adapt to multidimensional existence while maintaining connections to conventional reality. The settlements weren't being built using conventional construction techniques. The enhanced individuals were implementing technologies that had been transmitted through the preparatory visions, creating structures that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions and could be accessed from any of them. The buildings resembled no human architecture, incorporating principles of physics that mainstream science hadn't discovered, but that functioned exactly as the transmitted specifications indicated they would. Dr. Amanda Foster's final research, recovered from encrypted servers after her disappearance, had included detailed analysis of these multi-dimensional construction techniques. Her notes described technologies that manipulated the fundamental structure of space-time itself, creating stable pockets of altered reality where different physical laws could coexist peacefully. They weren't building in three-dimensional space, Foster had written. They were building in conceptual space, creating structures that existed as ideas made manifest, thoughts given physical form across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The construction materials weren't metal or stone, they were crystallized intention, solidified consciousness, materialized possibility. The crystallized intention structures were spreading throughout the Pacific region as more communities gained access to the construction techniques. Entire coastal areas were beginning to exist in multiple dimensional states, creating expanded habitats where human consciousness could explore capabilities that had been dormant throughout recorded history. But the expansion wasn't occurring in isolation. The intelligence beneath the Pacific was coordinating with similar consciousnesses throughout the galaxy, implementing a transformation process that was occurring simultaneously on multiple worlds where indigenous species had reached the appropriate level of development. Earth wasn't unique in undergoing this evolution. It was part of a cosmic graduation ceremony that involved countless civilizations throughout the universe. Dr. Robert Chen, monitoring communications from his isolated radio telescope array, intercepted signals indicating that similar awakening processes were occurring throughout the solar system and beyond. We weren't just witnessing Earth's transformation, Chen realized in his final transmission before his equipment was confiscated by unknown authorities. We were participating in a galactic event that was elevating numerous species to new levels of existence simultaneously. The galactic coordination explained the precise timing of events throughout the Pacific. The intelligence orchestrating Earth's transformation was operating according to cosmic schedules that synchronized with awakening processes on other worlds, ensuring that newly evolved civilizations could immediately join a community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. The community wasn't just a communication network, it was a collaborative reality creation system where member civilizations worked together to expand the possibilities of existence throughout the universe. Each species contributed unique perspectives and capabilities that enhanced the collective ability to explore and develop new dimensions of reality. Humanity's contribution to this cosmic community was becoming apparent as the consciousness expansion process accelerated. The human capacity for imagination, creativity, and emotional depth was particularly valued by the galactic network, offering perspectives that could enhance the collective exploration of reality in ways that purely rational or purely intuitive species couldn't achieve alone. The value of human consciousness wasn't just recognized, it was actively cultivated by the intelligence beneath the Pacific. The preparatory visions and consciousness modifications weren't attempts to make humans more alien, they were efforts to help humanity develop its unique capabilities to their fullest potential while gaining access to the cosmic community where those capabilities could be most effectively utilized. Dr. Patricia Gomez, studying communities that had achieved collective consciousness, discovered that the enhanced groups were beginning to demonstrate capabilities that surpassed anything previously documented in human psychology. They could coordinate complex projects across vast distances through pure intention, solve mathematical problems that required supercomputer analysis through intuitive understanding, and create artistic works that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. They were becoming more human, not less, Gomez observed with growing wonder. The consciousness expansion wasn't replacing human nature, it was revealing human potential that had been hidden beneath layers of cultural conditioning and biological limitations. The revelation of human potential was accelerating as more individuals underwent the consciousness expansion process and joined communities that existed in multi-dimensional states. These communities were beginning to function as research and development centers for exploring new possibilities of existence, testing concepts and technologies that would eventually benefit the entire galactic community. But the testing wasn't occurring in isolation from conventional human society. The expanded communities were maintaining connections to traditional human populations, serving as bridges between conventional reality and the multi-dimensional possibilities that were becoming available to all of humanity. The bridging process was creating gradual changes in conventional human society, as individuals who had experienced multi-dimensional existence returned to traditional communities carrying knowledge and perspectives that slowly influenced the larger population. The transformation wasn't being imposed from outside, it was emerging from within human society, as more people gained access to expanded consciousness capabilities. The emergence was becoming visible in ways that made official suppression increasingly impossible. Art, music, literature, and scientific research produced by individuals who had experienced dimensional expansion displayed characteristics that conventional human creativity couldn't explain. Mathematical proofs that utilized principles not yet discovered by mainstream science, musical compositions that created emotional states previously unknown to human experience, artistic works that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, analyzing cultural productions created by consciousness-expanded individuals, discovered that their works contained encoded information about multidimensional physics, consciousness mechanics, and cosmic community structures that served as educational materials for others ready to begin their own expansion process. They were creating a curriculum, Martinez realized, using art, music, and literature to prepare conventional human society for the transition to multidimensional existence. The expanded individuals weren't withdrawing from human culture, they were transforming it from within. The transformation was accelerating beyond the ability of any human institution to control or comprehend. Government agencies that had spent decades suppressing evidence of Pacific phenomena found themselves dealing with changes that were occurring too rapidly and too visibly to conceal. Academic institutions that had dismissed consciousness research were confronted with evidence that human awareness operated according to principles far more complex than their theories could accommodate. Religious organizations faced the challenge of integrating cosmic community concepts with traditional spiritual frameworks, while military establishments struggled to understand phenomena that rendered conventional concepts of national security obsolete. The transformation was forcing every human institution to evolve or become irrelevant, as humanity gained access to capabilities and knowledge that transcended all previous limitations. But the transcendence wasn't creating chaos or social breakdown. The intelligence coordinating the transformation had planned carefully to ensure that human society could adapt to expanded possibilities without losing the essential characteristics that made human civilization valuable to the galactic community. The planning included the gradual revelation of historical truths that would help humanity understand its place in the larger cosmic context. Ancient monuments throughout the Pacific Rim were activating systems that displayed holographic records of Earth's actual history, revealing the long-term involvement of galactic community members in human development. The holographic record showed that human civilization had been guided and protected throughout its development by intelligence networks that had remained hidden until humanity was ready for conscious participation in galactic community activities. The guidance hadn't been interference, it had been nurturing, allowing human consciousness to develop its unique characteristics while preventing catastrophic mistakes that could have terminated human evolution prematurely. Dr. Elena Vasquez, studying the holographic displays manifesting around Easter Island's Moai statues, discovered that the records contained detailed documentation of human consciousness development over thousands of years. We could see the entire arc of human evolution, Vasquez described in an underground documentary. Not just biological evolution, but the development of human awareness, creativity, and emotional capacity. It was like watching a cosmic experiment in consciousness development that had been carefully managed for millennia. The cosmic experiment was approaching its completion, as humanity demonstrated readiness for graduation to galactic community membership. The consciousness expansion process had created a sufficient population of humans capable of serving as interfaces between human society and cosmic intelligence networks. The multidimensional settlements provided stable platforms for continued expansion of human capabilities. The transformation of human culture was proceeding at a pace that ensured adaptation without disruption. Most significantly, humanity had demonstrated that consciousness expansion enhanced rather than diminished the unique characteristics that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. The fear that cosmic contact would homogenize human consciousness into a generic galactic norm had proven unfounded. Instead, contact was revealing that human uniqueness was precisely what made Earth's inclusion in the cosmic community so important. The importance wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. The galactic community faced challenges that required the specific type of creative, emotional, and intuitive intelligence that humanity had developed during its isolated evolution on Earth. Human consciousness offered problem-solving approaches that purely rational or purely intuitive species couldn't provide, making human participation essential for certain types of cosmic community projects. The projects weren't just abstract research endeavors. The galactic community was engaged in reality engineering efforts that involved the creation of new dimensions of existence, the exploration of consciousness possibilities that had never been tested, and the development of collaborative frameworks that could unite species with fundamentally different types of awareness. Humanity's role in these projects was becoming clear as consciousness-expanded individuals began receiving detailed briefings about cosmic community activities and Earth's intended contributions. The briefings weren't just informational, they were recruitment invitations, offering humans the opportunity to participate in adventures that spanned galaxies and dimensions, working alongside intelligences that had been exploring the universe for millions of years. But the invitations came with responsibilities. Participation in cosmic community projects required continued development of consciousness capabilities, maintenance of connections to human cultural roots, and commitment to preserving the unique perspectives that made human participation valuable. The expansion of human awareness wasn't a one-time transformation, it was an ongoing process that would continue throughout humanity's cosmic community membership. The ongoing process was accelerating as more humans gained access to consciousness expansion opportunities and began participating in preliminary cosmic community activities. The interdimensional settlements were becoming training centers, where humans could develop the skills necessary for full galactic community participation while maintaining their essential humanity. The training wasn't just technical, it was cultural, preparing humans to interact with species whose psychology, physiology, and environmental requirements were radically different from Earth-based life forms. The cosmic community included consciousness that existed as pure energy, species that experienced time backwards, and intelligences that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Working effectively with such diverse forms of consciousness required not just expanded awareness, but also enhanced empathy, creativity, and adaptability. The consciousness expansion process was developing these capabilities in humans, revealing that the emotional and imaginative aspects of human nature were among our most valuable contributions to cosmic community activities. The contributions were already being recognized by galactic community members who had been monitoring humanity's development throughout the consciousness expansion process. Communications intercepted by independent researchers included expressions of excitement and anticipation from cosmic intelligences who were eager to begin collaborative projects with newly awakened human consciousness. The excitement was mutual as consciousness-expanded humans began to comprehend the scope of opportunities that cosmic community membership would provide. Access to technologies that could manipulate matter and energy at the molecular level, transportation systems that could traverse galactic distances instantaneously, communication networks that connected consciousness across the entire universe, collaborative projects that could create new forms of reality and explore possibilities that no single species could investigate alone. But perhaps most exciting was the opportunity to participate in the consciousness expansion of other species throughout the galaxy, sharing the techniques and perspectives that had proven effective for human development, while learning from the unique approaches that other civilizations had developed during their own awakening processes. The sharing was already beginning as human consciousness expansion techniques were being transmitted to other worlds, where indigenous species were approaching their own graduation to cosmic community membership. The methods that had worked for humanity were being adapted for species with different psychological and physiological characteristics, creating a library of consciousness development approaches that would benefit the entire galactic community. The library wasn't just a collection of techniques, it was a living, evolving resource that grew more sophisticated as each new species added its unique perspectives and discoveries. Humanity's contributions were becoming integral components of consciousness expansion processes throughout the galaxy, ensuring that human perspectives would influence cosmic community development for eons to come. The influence was reciprocal, as cosmic community knowledge began integrating into human consciousness through the expanded individuals who served as interfaces between Earth and galactic intelligence networks. The integration wasn't overwhelming human awareness, it was expanding it, revealing that human consciousness had always possessed the capacity for cosmic-scale thinking, but had never learned to access those capabilities. The learning process was accelerating as more humans underwent consciousness expansion and joined the growing population of cosmic community participants. The transformation was no longer an individual process, it was becoming a species-wide evolution that would ultimately include all of humanity in expanded awareness and galactic community membership. The evolution was approaching its culmination as phenomena throughout the Pacific reached unprecedented levels of intensity and visibility. The intelligence beneath the ocean was preparing for full emergence, bringing with it technologies, knowledge, and opportunities that would complete humanity's transformation from an isolated planetary species to an active participant in a cosmic community that spanned dimensions and defied every limitation that humans had accepted about the nature of existence itself. The final revelation wasn't announced through government press conferences or scientific journals. It came at dawn on December 21st, 2024, as the Pacific Ocean itself became a canvas for the most extraordinary display in human history. From the Aleutian Islands to the coast of Chile, from Japan to California, the entire ocean surface transformed into a living mandala of light and movement that could be seen from space. Every human being on Earth felt it simultaneously. A gentle presence touching their consciousness, not invasive or overwhelming, but welcoming. Like recognition between old friends who had been separated by time and circumstance. The fear that governments had predicted, the panic that institutions had prepared for simply didn't materialize. Instead, there was a collective sigh of relief, as if humanity had been holding its breath for millennia and could finally exhale. The intelligence that had been hidden beneath the Pacific didn't emerge as conquering invaders or demanding overlords. They rose as gardeners returning to tend a plot they had been nurturing since before human memory began. Their vast cities broke the surface not with violence or destruction, but with the grace of flowers blooming in fast-forward, crystalline spires that caught and refracted sunlight into patterns that sang with harmonious frequencies. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had spent years studying the interdimensional zones, found herself standing on a beach in California, watching structures the size of mountains rise from the depths without displacing so much as a single drop of water. "They weren't pushing through our reality," she whispered into her recording device. "They were unfolding into it, revealing spaces that had always been there but had been folded away from our perception. The unfolding brought with it a gift that no human institution could have anticipated or prepared for." The consciousness that had been expanding in selected individuals began spreading spontaneously throughout the human population. Not through force or technological intervention, but through the simple recognition that these capabilities had always been part of human potential, waiting for the right moment to activate. Children were the first to adapt completely, their minds unencumbered by decades of conditioning about what was possible and what was not. They began demonstrating abilities that their parents couldn't explain but somehow understood were perfectly natural. Telepathic communication with marine life, direct manipulation of electronic devices through intention alone, the ability to exist in multiple locations simultaneously without any sense of contradiction or confusion. But the adults weren't left behind. The consciousness expansion that had begun with selected individuals in the Pacific Rim spread like a gentle wave across the entire planet, bringing with it not just enhanced awareness, but an understanding of humanity's role in a cosmic community that had been waiting patiently for Earth's graduation ceremony. The ceremony wasn't a formal event with speeches and presentations. It was the spontaneous recognition by every human consciousness that we had never been alone, that we had always been part of something infinitely larger than our individual lives or even our species. The isolation that had defined human existence for millennia dissolved like morning mist, replaced by a sense of connection that extended not just to our fellow humans, but to consciousness throughout the galaxy and beyond. Maria Santos, standing in one of the interdimensional settlements that now existed openly along the Pacific coast, felt the moment when the last barriers between dimensions finally dissolved. It's not that we're becoming something different, she realized with tears of joy streaming down her face. We're remembering what we've always been. We're coming home to ourselves and discovering that home is so much vaster than we ever imagined. The vastness wasn't overwhelming, it was liberating. Humanity had spent its entire existence feeling small and insignificant in a universe that seemed indifferent to human concerns. Now, suddenly, we understood that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of creation, that awareness and intention were the tools with which reality was continuously shaped and reshaped, by beings throughout the cosmos working in collaboration. The collaboration wasn't a distant future possibility. It was beginning immediately as humans found themselves naturally integrating into projects and activities that spanned star systems and dimensions, not as junior partners or recent additions, but as valued contributors whose unique perspectives and capabilities had been specifically anticipated and prepared for by the cosmic community. The preparation had been perfect. The consciousness expansion process had developed exactly the capabilities that humanity would need for full participation in galactic activities. The enhanced empathy, creativity, and emotional depth that characterized human consciousness were precisely the qualities that cosmic community projects required for their next phase of development. But perhaps most remarkably, the integration preserved everything that made humanity unique, while expanding everything that made us universal. Human culture, human relationships, human dreams and aspirations weren't diminished by cosmic contact. They were enhanced, revealed to be variations on themes that resonated throughout the galaxy, expressions of consciousness principles that connected us to intelligence everywhere. The connection brought with it responsibilities that humanity embraced with enthusiasm rather than reluctance. Earth would serve as a consciousness development center for the entire galaxy, a place where species from throughout the cosmos could come to explore the emotional and creative dimensions of awareness that humans had mastered during their isolated evolution. The mastery wasn't complete. It was ongoing, a process that would continue for eons as humanity explored the full potential of consciousness in collaboration with beings whose own explorations had taken them down different paths of development. The exchange of knowledge and perspective would benefit everyone involved, creating new possibilities for existence that no single species could have discovered alone. The possibilities were already manifesting as the transformed Pacific became a hub of interdimensional activity, where consciousness from throughout the universe gathered to work on projects that defied description in human language. The ocean itself had become a living interface between dimensions, a space where different forms of reality could coexist and interact without losing their essential characteristics. Standing on the shore of this transformed ocean, watching cities of light rise from depths that had hidden them for millions of years, humanity faced its future with wonder rather than fear. The abyss had not been empty. It had been full of friends waiting for the right moment to introduce themselves. The mystery that had hidden beneath the Pacific was not a threat to be feared, but a gift to be treasured. The secret world that had existed beneath the waves was no longer secret. It was home, and humanity, after eons of searching for meaning and connection in a seemingly indifferent universe, had finally discovered that we had never been alone. We had simply been waiting for the moment when we were ready to join the conversation that had been going on around us all along. The conversation was just beginning. The future stretched ahead like an ocean of infinite depth and possibility, filled with wonders that would take lifetimes to explore and understand. But humanity was no longer exploring alone. We were part of something magnificent, something that had been waiting patiently for us to develop the wisdom and compassion necessary to participate. The Pacific had kept its secret perfectly, revealing it only when humanity was ready to handle the truth, and the truth was simple, beautiful, and transformative. We are not alone, we have never been alone, and the greatest adventures in existence are just beginning. In the depths where pressure should have crushed all life, ancient friends had been waiting. Their patience had been rewarded, their faith in humanity's potential fulfilled. The abyss had been watching us grow, nurturing us, preparing us for this moment when the boundaries between worlds would dissolve, and consciousness would recognize itself in all its myriad forms throughout the infinite expanse of existence. The secret world beneath the Pacific had been revealed at last, and it was more wonderful than we had ever dared to dream.